It began with a voice that vanished into the night. Not the usual static or a bad connection, but a voice frozen mid-urgency, a life in motion suspended by a single, impossible silence. It was March 17, 2011. London streets were slick with rain, the kind that turns asphalt into a mirror reflecting 1,000 distant lights. Street lamps flickered through the mist, casting long, trembling shadows across pavements empty except for the occasional passerby, heads bowed against the cold. In the Southwark district, where narrow roads twist like veins through brick and stone neighborhoods, one apartment block hummed with the faint warmth of late-night life. And then the phone rang. Detective Inspector Miriam Langley would later describe the call as a sound that demanded attention. But in the moment, it was just noise filtered through the dispatcher's headset, competing with the static, the ringing, and the hum of a city that rarely sleeps. 999, what's your emergency? Came the professional voice of the operator. The response was abrupt, fragmented, terrified. A woman, barely audible, whispered something about someone being outside, someone watching, someone coming. And then, the line went dead. No one could have anticipated what followed. When the first officers arrived at the apartment, they found nothing that made sense. The door was locked from the inside. The lights were off. A faint smell of perfume lingered, sweet but fleeting. And the woman? Gone. Not missing in the usual sense. Not a runaway. Not a case filed away under voluntary disappearance. She had left behind no note, no sign of struggle, only the faint imprint of a life abruptly interrupted. Outside, the city continued to breathe in its indifferent rhythm. Cars passed through puddles, their tires spraying water across cobblestones. A bus hummed down Borough High Street. Somewhere a dog barked, but inside the apartment, time had stopped. Officers scoured the space. An overturned chair in the hallway, a mug on the counter half full of tea, the laptop still open on the table with a paused video on screen. Each clue seemed ordinary, mundane, but the absence of her presence made them terrifying. Every item, every sound, every shadow suddenly felt weighted with threat. For weeks, the city seemed to hold its breath. The call became infamous in police circles, not for what it said, but for what it didn't. What it left unanswered. A single moment, a single heartbeat caught in the static of a phone line. And yet, despite the silence, the mystery had begun to whisper. Somewhere in the city, the traces of her movements remained. Digital footprints faintly glowing on traffic cameras. Grocery store receipts time-stamped hours before her disappearance. GPS pings from her phone that hinted at a path no one had expected. The question was no longer simply where she had gone, but why, who, or what had influenced the choices that led her to vanish before the line went dead. This is where the story begins, not with bodies or suspects, but with a sound, a line, and the first impossibly quiet step into a labyrinth of shadows. As we unravel this case, watch closely. Notice the details that seem irrelevant. Every blink, every echo, every reflection could be the thread that pulls back the veil. By the end of this episode, you may begin to see the pattern. But for now, remember this. Some disappearances leave a trace in the world, and some leave a mark on the mind that refuses to fade. The morning after the call, Detective Inspector Miriam Langley returned to the apartment with a team of forensic officers. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and shimmering, the city reflecting in puddles like a distorted mirror. It was one of those mornings when London feels alive yet empty, the hum of the underground trains and distant church bells the only constants. Inside the apartment, everything appeared untouched. The faint aroma of perfume lingered in the air, mixing with the metallic scent of the rain outside. Yet Langley knew instinctively that appearances were deceiving. Disappearances rarely leave obvious traces, especially ones executed with quiet precision. Every item, every corner, every shadow could be a clue if only one knew how to read it. First, they documented the scene. Photographs captured the small details. A jacket draped over a chair, shoes lined neatly by the door, a window slightly ajar with the curtain barely moving. Nothing suggested a struggle. No fingerprints outside of the usual occupants. No signs of forced entry. And yet, the woman was gone. Langley crouched beside the mug of half-finished tea. She had an uncanny ability to sense the story hidden in the mundane. The cup was warm when touched, indicating it had been handled recently. But the tea had begun to cool unevenly, suggesting movement. But what kind? She noted the position of the laptop, still on, its screen frozen mid-video. The cursor hovered over the pause button. Who had left it there? And why? The team expanded their search to the building. Surveillance cameras lined the hallways, capturing the usual rhythm of tenants coming and going. But when the footage was reviewed, nothing unusual appeared. No one entering or leaving at odd hours. It was as if the woman had simply evaporated from the world, leaving no ripple behind. Digital traces, however, told a different story. Langley's team pulled GPS logs from her phone, bank transaction timestamps, and location data from her recent credit card purchases. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge. The dots on the map seemed random at first. A corner shop at 10:12 p.m., a payphone at 10:35 p.m., a bus route that diverged from the usual path. But then, anomalies appeared. Movements inconsistent with the woman's known habits, subtle deviations from her usual routes, moments where her phone pinged near locations she had never mentioned to anyone. Langley leaned over the evidence spread across her desk, connecting the dots with a red string. Each thread seemed innocuous, almost trivial, but together they began to form the shape of a story she could barely comprehend. Someone or something had influenced her path in those final minutes before the call ended. The line had gone dead, yes, but the movements before and after suggested calculation, intent, and secrecy. Interviews with neighbors provided little clarity. Most had heard nothing unusual that night. No raised voices, no footsteps, no disturbances. A few recalled seeing a figure loitering in the hallways earlier in the evening, but descriptions were vague. A shadow, a silhouette, nothing concrete. Yet Langley noted the consistency of these fleeting observations, small, almost imperceptible details that collectively painted a picture of someone watching, waiting, and guiding events from the periphery. By the end of the first day, Langley realized the case would not be solved through conventional means alone. It required reading between the lines, interpreting absence as presence, and recognizing that the most important clues often hide in silence. The woman's disappearance wasn't random. It was deliberate. And somewhere within the city's veins, beneath the rain, behind the fog, in the hum of underground trains, was a trail waiting to be followed. As night fell, Langley stared at the map of locations and timestamps, tracing a path that no one had seen. The pieces were coming together, but only just. Somewhere along this digital trail lay the first tangible hint of where the woman had gone. And with that realization came a chilling thought. The line had gone dead, but the story was far from over. Someone had orchestrated the events leading up to it, and now Langley had to chase shadows across the city, piecing together a puzzle that had remained unsolved for a single critical night. The morning light revealed little more than the gray monotony of the city, but for Detective Inspector Miriam Langley, it carried the sharp edge of purpose. Overnight, her team had combed through every digital trace, every ledger, every camera angle available. And finally, a thread appeared, thin but undeniable. A single GPS ping, barely a blip on the map, placed the woman in an abandoned section of East London just 30 minutes before the 999 call. It was the kind of location no one wandered into by accident. Boarded up warehouses, cracked asphalt, graffiti layered like the scars of forgotten decades. For Langley, it was both a breakthrough and a warning. Whoever had taken the woman, or whoever had manipulated her movements, knew this territory intimately. The absence of witnesses here was not luck, it was design. Langley gathered her small tactical unit and approached the area cautiously. The streets were silent. The occasional flicker of neon from a distant convenience store the only evidence of life. Broken glass crunched underfoot, and the wind carried the scent of damp concrete and rust. Her flashlight cut through the dimness, revealing peeling paint, broken windows, and shadows that moved like memory itself. The first clue appeared in the form of a door left ajar, swinging slightly with the draft. Inside, the space was a time capsule of neglect. Overturned chairs, a shattered clock frozen at 10:47 p.m., remnants of what might once have been a meeting point or temporary shelter. Langley's eyes adjusted to the gloom, picking out the faint outline of something taped to a wall. An envelope, yellowed with age, labeled in careful, meticulous handwriting. The envelope contained photographs, blurred, hurried shots of a city that had moved on while someone remained tethered to its hidden corridors. Each image was annotated with a time, a location, and a brief note. Waiting. Alone. Observed. The handwriting was unfamiliar, precise, and almost clinical, yet it radiated urgency. Whoever had compiled this record had been watching the woman for days, possibly weeks, before she ever dialed 999. Langley's mind raced. The envelope was more than a clue. It was a message. A breadcrumb trail left by a meticulous observer who wanted their presence to be known, yet carefully concealed. She traced her fingers over the times and coordinates, realizing the city itself could be read like a ledger. Each alley, bridge, and side street a line in the account of someone's movements. Back at headquarters, analysts began overlaying the envelope's coordinates onto previous GPS data, cross-referencing timestamps with known routes and habits. Patterns emerged. The woman had not been wandering aimlessly. She had been following instructions, subtle but consistent cues that dictated where she would appear and when. Someone had orchestrated her movements with precision, testing boundaries, mapping reactions, and isolating her from the familiar rhythms of life. Interviews with neighbors provided fragmented insight. One tenant recalled seeing a delivery van parked incongruously near the building the night before, its driver lingering far longer than necessary. Another remembered a figure in a dark hoodie slipping down the fire escape, just as the woman left for what should have been an ordinary evening. Pieces of evidence that had seemed unrelated now aligned with unnerving clarity. The envelope, the van, the shadow, each was part of a calculated web designed to obscure, distract, and control. Langley began piecing together the psychological portrait of the person behind this orchestration. Patient, manipulative, strategic. Not a random opportunist, but someone who had studied the woman, anticipated her actions, and created conditions to ensure she would end up exactly where they intended. Every misstep she might have made alone had been accounted for, every possible escape route considered. The first lead had been found. The investigation was no longer about a simple disappearance. It was about tracking a carefully choreographed sequence of control, manipulation, and secrecy. Somewhere in the city, hidden in plain sight, was the architect of her vanishing. Langley understood, with a clarity that was almost cold in its precision, that the next steps would be dangerous. Every alleyway, every abandoned building, every overlooked shadow could conceal a truth too unsettling to imagine. Yet the investigation had momentum now, and with it came the first real hope of understanding what had happened in the minutes before the line went dead. The first thing Langley noticed when she walked back into the incident room was the silence. It wasn't the tired kind that comes after long hours. It was the concentrated, electric quiet of discovery. Her digital analyst, Patel, had something. His monitor glowed in the half-light, casting blue shadows over a wall plastered with photographs, maps, and timelines that now bled into one another like veins of a living organism. "Detective," Patel said without turning, his voice steady but tense. "You need to see this." On the screen was a timeline reconstructed from the woman's phone and GPS data, an unbroken string of pings, message timestamps, and brief connections to unsecured networks. It looked ordinary at first, but then, as Patel zoomed in, something uncanny became visible. Her device had connected repeatedly to the same Wi-Fi network in multiple, unconnected parts of the city. "That shouldn't be possible," Langley murmured. "It's not," Patel replied, "unless someone cloned the network. or wanted her to think she was always connecting to something safe. The clone network was named Cafe Orbita. It had followed her, appearing near her flat, outside her gym, along the stretch of road where her car was later found abandoned. Every time her phone auto-connected, the network would gain access to her location, her messages, even her microphone if permissions had been tampered with. The chilling realization settled in the room like fog. Whoever orchestrated this hadn't just been following her. They'd been inside her phone, shadowing her every move. Langley leaned closer to the monitor. When was the first connection? 3 weeks before the 999 call, Patel said. The same day her work badge stopped scanning properly. Same hour, even. The timing was too precise to dismiss. The woman hadn't stumbled into danger. She'd been ensnared in it, step by step, through digital threads invisible to the untrained eye. Whoever had built this network knew her habits, her commute, her routines, even when she stopped for coffee. It was stalking elevated to an art form. Patient, systematic, and mercilessly quiet. Langley ordered a deep dive audit on all devices associated with the woman's account. Within hours, the data unearthed something more disturbing. There were photos, not the kind taken willingly, but covert images captured through her phone's front camera. Most were unrecognizable fragments. Her hands on the steering wheel, her reflection in a shop window, the blurred edge of her flat's hallway. But one stood out. It showed her sitting at a cafe table, expression unreadable, as though she already suspected she was being watched. In the reflection of the cafe's window, faint but unmistakable, was another figure holding a phone aimed directly at her. The metadata placed that photo 2 days before she vanished. Langley's pulse quickened. Can we enhance the reflection? Patel nodded, running the image through filters. Slowly, the ghostly figure gained definition. A male silhouette, head slightly bowed, wearing a dark jacket. His face was obscured, but one detail emerged. A patch sewn onto his sleeve, military style, with the faded letters Vanguard embroidered in red. Langley frowned. She'd heard that name before, whispered in connection with a string of unsolved stalking cases from the early 2010s. Cases that had all gone cold when the suspect disappeared off the grid. She stepped back, assessing the room. The pieces were aligning into a pattern that felt both technological and personal. Someone was resurrecting an old game, one that blurred the boundaries between surveillance and obsession. The woman hadn't simply been abducted. She had been studied, her life gradually reconstructed until she existed only within a digital perimeter controlled by her watcher. Langley's next step was clear: trace Vanguard. But the moment Patel tried to access the archived case files, his terminal glitched. The cursor froze, the lights flickered, and the screen flooded with a line of text neither of them had typed. Stop looking. You're too late. The message vanished as quickly as it appeared. The monitor rebooted, returning to its idle screen like nothing had happened. Langley and Patel exchanged a glance that needed no words. The investigation had crossed a line. Someone was watching them now, too. Langley exhaled slowly. We're not backing off. Pull every reference to Vanguard. Old case logs, private security databases, anything. As Patel began typing again, Langley turned toward the evidence board. The photographs, the envelope, the Wi-Fi map, it all led here. To a predator who thrived in the blind spots of technology, hiding behind the very systems meant to protect people. And as she stared at the photo of the woman's reflection, Langley couldn't shake one thought. The 999 call hadn't been random. It had been a signal, a last attempt to be heard before silence took her completely. The morning light revealed little more than the gray monotony of the city, but for Detective Inspector Miriam Langley, it carried the sharp edge of purpose. Overnight, her team had combed through every digital trace, every ledger, every camera angle available. And finally, a thread appeared, thin but undeniable. A single GPS ping, barely a blip on the map, placed the woman in an abandoned section of East London just 30 minutes before the 999 call. It was the kind of location no one wandered into by accident. Boarded up warehouses, cracked asphalt, graffiti layered like the scars of forgotten decades. For Langley, it was both a breakthrough and a warning. Whoever had taken the woman, or whoever had manipulated her movements, knew this territory intimately. The absence of witnesses here was not luck, it was design. Langley gathered her small tactical unit and approached the area cautiously. The streets were silent. The occasional flicker of neon from a distant convenience store the only evidence of life. Broken glass crunched underfoot, and the wind carried the scent of damp concrete and rust. Her flashlight cut through the dimness, revealing peeling paint, broken windows, and shadows that moved like memory itself. The first clue appeared in the form of a door left ajar, swinging slightly with the draft. Inside, the space was a time capsule of neglect. Overturned chairs, a shattered clock frozen at 10:47 p.m., remnants of what might once have been a meeting point or temporary shelter. Langley's eyes adjusted to the gloom, picking out the faint outline of something taped to a wall. An envelope, yellowed with age, labeled in careful, meticulous handwriting. The envelope contained photographs, blurred, hurried shots of a city that had moved on while someone remained tethered to its hidden corridors. Each image was annotated with a time, a location, and a brief note. Waiting. Alone. Observed. The handwriting was unfamiliar, precise, and almost clinical, yet it radiated urgency. Whoever had compiled this record had been watching the woman for days, possibly weeks, before she ever dialed 999. Langley's mind raced. The envelope was more than a clue. It was a message. A breadcrumb trail left by a meticulous observer who wanted their presence to be known, yet carefully concealed. She traced her fingers over the times and coordinates, realizing the city itself could be read like a ledger. Each alley, bridge, and side street aligned in the account of someone's movements. Back at headquarters, analysts began overlaying the envelope's coordinates onto previous GPS data, cross-referencing timestamps with known routes and habits. Patterns emerged. The woman had not been wandering aimlessly. She had been following instructions, subtle but consistent cues that dictated where she would appear and when. Someone had orchestrated her movements with precision, testing boundaries, mapping reactions, and isolating her from the familiar rhythms of life. Interviews with neighbors provided fragmented insight. One tenant recalled seeing a delivery van parked incongruously near the building the night before, its driver lingering far longer than necessary. Another remembered a figure in a dark hoodie slipping down the fire escape, just as the woman left for what should have been an ordinary evening. Pieces of evidence that had seemed unrelated now aligned with unnerving clarity. The envelope, the van, the shadow, each was part of a calculated web designed to obscure, distract, and control. Langley began piecing together the psychological portrait of the person behind this orchestration. Patient, manipulative, strategic. Not a random opportunist, but someone who had studied the woman, anticipated her actions, and created conditions to ensure she would end up exactly where they intended. Every misstep she might have made alone had been accounted for, every possible escape route considered. The first lead had been found. The investigation was no longer about a simple disappearance. It was about tracking a carefully choreographed sequence of control, manipulation, and secrecy. Somewhere in the city, hidden in plain sight, was the architect of her vanishing. Langley understood, with a clarity that was almost cold in its precision, that the next steps would be dangerous. Every alleyway, every abandoned building, every overlooked shadow could conceal a truth too unsettling to imagine. Yet the investigation had momentum now, and with it came the first real hope of understanding what had happened in the minutes before the line went dead. The storm outside Manchester had rolled in without warning. Sharp wind, sheets of rain against glass. Inside the precinct, it felt like the pressure was rising too. Every screen glowed with fragments of a woman's life that no one could yet assemble into meaning. Langley leaned over the caseboard again. The reflection in the cafe window haunted her. That faint patch, Vanguard. She couldn't shake the feeling that she'd seen it before, not in an official file, but somewhere off record. Patel returned with a folder, old, yellowed, unlabeled. "You're not going to like this," he said quietly. Inside were clippings and reports from a disbanded cyber task force, dated between 2010 and 2013. It documented a group of anonymous digital mercenaries known as Vanguard. They built surveillance systems for private clients, spouses tracking partners, corporations monitoring whistleblowers, even local councils trying to suppress leaks. Then the group vanished after a whistleblower's death was ruled a suicide. Langley flipped through page after page until one photograph stopped her cold. It was a press image from 2012, a crime scene shot showing a woman's phone lying in a puddle. The case number had been redacted, but scribbled on the corner in pencil were 3 letters, EHM. Langley stared. "That's the same case prefix as the current one." Patel nodded. Every internal system assigns that prefix to emergency hold missing. The same tag's been recycled only once in the last decade. "So, this isn't random," Langley murmured. "Someone resurrected an old file." Patel turned his screen toward her again. "That's not all. I checked the woman's last known address. The landlord's company shares a registry address with a data recovery firm called Vanguard Systems." Langley finished for him. The realization hit like a thunderclap. The company that had access to her lease, her security cameras, even her internet connection, was the same one the suspect's symbol referred to. This wasn't just stalking. It was entrapment through infrastructure, ownership disguised as service. Patel hesitated before continuing. "There's something else, Detective. You remember the voicemail you mentioned? The one that sounded like a warning before the line cut out." Langley nodded. "I cleaned up the audio. There's a second voice in the background, barely audible, but it's there. A man's voice." You press play. The faint static resolved into the woman's panicked tone. They're in the walls, they're watching everything. Then, barely above the hum of interference, another voice whispered something indecipherable. Patel slowed it down, ran a filter, and replayed it. "Tell her it's not over." Langley felt the hairs on her arms rise. "Tell who?" Patel looked uneasy. "Detective, the waveform matches another sample in our system. Your voicemail greeting from the precinct line." Langley froze. "That's not possible. It's your voice pattern," he said quietly. "The modulation, the rhythm. Someone cloned it." The implications spiraled fast. Someone with access to her voice, possibly through internal channels, had manipulated the recording. That meant the case wasn't just an external threat. It was compromised from within. Langley stepped back, her mind racing. If someone had the ability to hijack communications, mimic voices, and erase traces, they could rewrite any piece of digital evidence in this case. The truth could be fabricated, and she'd never know. Patel broke the silence. "Detective, I think she knew you." Langley looked up sharply. "The missing woman," he continued. "I found her full name in a fragment of the deleted files, Elena Harrow." He hesitated. She used to work for Vanguard Systems as a data engineer. Langley's pulse thudded. Harrow, the same surname as a cold case she'd read years ago. The Maynard Gallery disappearance, 2003. The stolen portrait, Eliza Harrow, 1879. Artist unknown. "What if," she whispered, connecting the names in her mind, "they're related?" Before Patel could respond, his screen flickered again. This time, instead of a warning, a live video feed appeared. A dimly lit room, a single bulb swaying overhead, and on the floor, dust, a chair, a shadow moving just beyond the frame. Langley stepped closer. "Is this live?" Patel's hands shook. "It's streaming through the missing woman's phone ID." "That's impossible. It's been offline for 2 weeks." The camera adjusted, and for a moment, a face appeared in the corner of the frame. Female, bruised, terrified. It was her, Elena Harrow. Then the screen went black. A new message appeared, burned into the pixels. "Find the original signal, or she vanishes again." Langley exhaled, the rain hammering against the window like a clock counting down. Whoever had taken Elena wasn't finished. The game was escalating, and she'd just become part of it. "Trace the source," she ordered, her voice low. "I don't care if it's in the city or halfway across the world. find where that feed came from. Patel nodded, fingers flying across the keyboard. But deep down, Langley knew something no one else in the room did. The voice in that whisper, tell her it's not over. It wasn't from a stranger. It was from someone she'd once trusted. The rain outside had turned to static, the kind of relentless hiss that seeps through the city and into the bones of anyone still awake. Inside the precinct, it was nearly midnight. The glow of monitors painted the room in electric blue as Patel traced the origin of the hijacked video feed. Signals bouncing off 3 proxy servers, he muttered, eyes flicking from map to code. 2 in Prague, 1 in O. Wait, this one's local. Langley leaned closer. We're local. Patel swallowed. Oldham, industrial quarter, a warehouse near the canal. Langley's pulse quickened. The same area the woman's last GPS ping had come from before the call cut out. The storm rattled the windows. Something about the silence between the thunder made the room feel too large, too empty. Langley reached for her coat. Get a team ready. We move now. But as she turned toward the door, every monitor in the room flickered, once, twice, and then went black. The hum of the servers cut out. Only the low buzz of emergency lights filled the void. Then, one screen at the far end came alive again. A new feed. No signal source. No IP trace. Just a single window of moving, grainy footage. Langley and Patel stared as the image stabilized. A room, cold, gray, silent. In the center, a chair. And on the chair, her badge. Langley's own police badge, smeared with dust, laid carefully under a hanging light. A voice, familiar, calm, filtered through the speakers. You shouldn't have looked, Louise. Langley froze. The voice wasn't the missing woman's. It wasn't Patel's. It was her own. The screen glitched, and the badge shifted slightly. Behind it, for just a fraction of a second, something else came into view. A hand, motionless, pale, resting on the floor. Then the feed cut to black again. No sound. No trace. Just one final message, blinking in red text. Round 2 begins at midnight. Langley stared at the words, the reflection of the red letters burning across her face. She knew what they meant. Whoever had taken Elena, Harrow wasn't done. They'd turned the investigation into a performance. And the next act had already begun. This was Trace Crime Files. Subscribe for more stories where truth is stranger than fiction, and justice is never as simple as it seems.